Welcome back to another video, guys. If you're new to the channel, this is my E36 drift car that I'm swapping a 2JZ into. This is a 2JZ GE from like an IS300. It is a VVTi head on a non-VVTi block because the non-VVTi block had way stronger rods. So you can see we've got a big turbo on it. We are running a stock JDM Aristo ECU. And if you missed the last episode, make sure you go and check it out because we finally got this thing running. It sounds freaking awesome. The turbo spools up, it idles, it revs, it does everything it should do. So now it's time to wrap it all up and try to drive this thing. So in order to do that, as you can see, there's a bunch of stuff left to do. The radiator's not hooked up to anything. We've just got lines here. It also has the cap cut off. So I'm going to weld a plate over the cap. We're putting an expansion tank over in that corner as well as an overflow. So I need to run all of those things. Basically, my goal for right now is to get everything in the engine bay as far as brackets and everything else done so that I can pull everything out, paint the engine bay, and be done with the engine bay, put everything back in, and be able to finish the car. But the first thing on the list is going to be the engine harness. So I wired this harness from scratch, basically from the ECU to all the sensors. So right now it's kind of a mess. It's just a bunch of wires everywhere. So we need to get loom put on it, make it look all pretty. And once we've done that, then we'll be able to pull it all off and have it be nice and neat when we pull the engine out. So I'm gonna get started on that. So as you can see, when I built it, I used tons and tons of zip ties to keep everything together that needed to be in one path. So as I loom it, I'm going to put just a little piece of electrical tape in a few places, cut all the zip ties because I don't want those rubbing through the insulation on the wires or anything like that, and then just put the split sleeve loom over it as I work my way through it. So let's hurry up and get that done so we can move on to other things. Okay, so now that I got all the zip ties removed and everything taped and laid out the way it should be, I'm gonna pull the whole harness out of the car and then put the loom on it. Okay, so for loom, I have this split, this braided split loom like this, so we can just put it right over the wires. I've got it in a couple sizes. I've got 1/2 inch and 3/4. It'd be nice to have a smaller size too, like a 1/4 inch for some of these single sensors. And ideally, at the end of your split loom, you would put heat shrink around of it to hold the end tight. But to do that, you'd have to de-pin all the connectors, put the shrink tube on, and re-pin everything. And I don't feel like doing that, so I have some cloth wiring harness tape. So I'll use that on the ends and in all of my joints. But it's pretty simple. We just need to start putting it all on. Wherever we need wires to come out of the harness, we'll make a small cut in the harness to open up a spot for them, and then we'll put tape around that. This stuff is not easy to cut through. We're gonna cheat. Let's see if this will cut it. That was definitely way faster. Okay, there it is, all done. It's definitely not as nice a quality as like a wiring specialties harness, but looks pretty good if you ask me. So here's some of that cloth tape. As you can see there, it actually is surprisingly nice quality, sticks really well. And the reason you want to use this cloth tape is because the electrical tape gets really plasticky looking, and once it gets dust or dirt on it, it just stands out against the harness and looks like crap, whereas this tape should blend in with the harness. I mean, if you look at it like this, you can't even see it on there. It blends in pretty good. So, you know, all this is tape right here and here. I didn't bother taping up these single wire like cam sensors and things like that. Just didn't really feel a need to. You won't really see those wires anyways. They'll be tucked under the intake. So yeah, now that that's done, I'm going to throw it back on the car and we'll make sure the engine still starts. Okay, so apparently it won't start without the knock sensors plugged in. I forgot to plug those in underneath the intake. Once I plugged those in, it started right up again. So now the harness is officially done unless we have to make any changes, which I hope we don't have to do. I tried to make it as minimalistic as possible while still being functional. So we have our quick disconnect here for everything that goes to the fuse panel. And other than that, we've got our igniter, little noise suppression device there, and then ECU. So I think next on the agenda is going to be the cooling system, or at least mounting the expansion tank and the overflow, and then figuring out anything else that needs to be mounted in the engine bay, because obviously I want to get everything done in there before paint so that I'm not scratching anything up if I'm trying to install it all later. Got to figure out how I'm going to mount the expansion tank and overflow over there. I do have the boost sensor that needs to be mounted somewhere over here, as well as a reservoir for the clutch and a power steering reservoir also. Okay, so here's my expansion tank. So basically, the way an expansion tank works is instead of the radiator having a cap, the radiator will have its two main lines like normal, but then it'll have like a 10 AN line where the radiator cap would be, like towards the top so that it lets air out. That line will come up into the expansion tank. So then you can fill it from here. You have your cap here, and you can bleed it from here too, and you have a overflow port. So it's extremely important that the expansion tank is higher than the engine. Basically, you want it as high as possible. That way the air will rise up into here and can come out the top. So yeah, I've got my expansion tank that I'll put here, and then I'm gonna mount an overflow tank as well. I'm gonna need to get some rubber washers or rubber spacers to put behind this so that the hood strut will clear it. But for now, I'm just gonna use a couple nuts on the backside. Hopefully they'll be tall enough. And now we see if the hood clears. Ooh. It's actually perfect. You can barely see it in there, but the hood shock just barely clears. We could use a little bit taller rubber washers when I get those, but for now, this will work. Now I need to see if I have room for the overflow. So this is what I've got for overflow. It's very simple. It just has one line going into it from the overflow barb on the expansion tank. Tricky part is going to be finding a good place to mount it that's not in the way of the ECU. Probably don't want it on its side. If I put it down here, it'll probably get really hot next to the turbo. That might be okay, actually. So I'll probably put a turbo blanket over the turbo anyways. Okay, so I got everything in the engine bay mocked up for mounting positions. So like over here, we're gonna have our clutch fluid reservoir, and right here we'll have our power steering reservoir. I don't have a catch can yet, so I don't have that mocked up, but I think that's the last thing that I need to mount in the engine bay. So I'm not too worried about that. I can do that after paint, no big deal. So now it's time to pull out the engine again. Hopefully this is the last time ever until this thing blows up, which hopefully that never happens. But first I'm gonna pull off the front end, and now I can pull out the engine. So the engine is out. I also took the time to loom the chassis harness, at least the part that's in the engine bay. So yeah, now I just need to remove everything that's in the engine bay and get it ready for paint. I'm also going to remove the whole subframe so that I can power wash that, get it all cleaned up, and not have to worry about masking around it while I paint. So really, there's not a whole lot in here that needs to come out. Yeah, 5 minutes and we'll have it all out. Something to always remember, guys, and to be careful when you're pulling engines and especially subframes and you take all of this weight out of the front of the car, it makes the car way more rear heavy, which means that now your jack stands aren't level, so you can easily raise the front up and down. So that's not safe. We don't want this thing to fall on us. So what I'm going to do is put a jack stand under the rear so that it can't tip. So we got everything out of the engine bay. And now we got to prep for stitch welding. So if you guys aren't familiar with stitch welding, basically when you pull out all the seam sealer and all of these seams, you're actually taking away a lot of strength. That seam sealer helps glue all these pieces together basically. And without it, if you don't do anything, just driving the car, especially in a racing application, can make, you have so much shaking. It's gonna make all of these layers start to peel apart at the spot welds. If you can see these little dots here, these are spot welds, and BMW puts quite a few of them on there, but they're just tiny little spot welds. So we need to stitch weld along the seams to make sure all of our panels don't start separating. And basically they call it stitch welding because you just do, little stitches. So a few here, a few here, a few here, etc. So I'm gonna get rid of all the paint along the seams and get everything stitch welded. Okay, stitch weld's done. This is actually one of the harder things to weld because no matter how hard you try, you can't really get all the seam sealer out from underneath the seam. So as you weld it, it melts that seam sealer and it instantly just bubbles up in your weld. It's a really big pain in the butt, but got it done. Came out pretty decent. So now for the fun part, we get to start sanding. It's probably about my least favorite thing in the whole world to do. I freaking hate sanding. It takes forever, it's tedious, and overall just annoying, but it's one of those things that has to get done, so I'm gonna stop talking about it and get to it. So as you can see, I went ahead and took the hood off. I also power washed some of the parts of the engine bay, and I sprayed some extra primer on the spots that were really bad. So now we can go ahead and start sanding. I'm gonna use the DA on some of the really bad spots that need extra attention, and then the rest of it I'll probably just hand sand, but I guess we'll see how aggressive this is first. So the shock towers are the most important part of the engine bay as far as paint is concerned, because really everywhere else in the bay is going to have stuff mounted on it, so you're not really going to see big flat areas of the paint. But with the shock tower, that's a different story. That's the main part that you see that has a large surface area of paint. So I'm really trying to focus on getting all the scratches and deep gouges out of those. Once I'm done with that, then we'll clean and scuff the rest of the engine bay, maybe sand it a little bit, and then lay down some primer on the whole thing. Okay, so I ended up primering and sanding the shock towers about 3 times to try to get all the perfections out of it. At the end of the day, it's an engine bay. It's not going to be perfect, and it's going to get beat up and scratched no matter what. But I got them looking pretty good, so now I am just wiping down the whole engine bay with wax and grease remover, just to make sure that all the dirt is gone before we lay down primer. Okay, we're finally ready for primer. Okay, so we got the first coat of primer done. I'm gonna do one more coat of primer, but before I spray on the coat, I'm gonna let this coat dry for about 10 minutes, and then I'm gonna scuff it with the red Scotch-Brite just to knock off any of the overspray dust or anything like that and smooth it out again. Lay on another coat. Okay, so primer's done. And as you can see, we've set up a temporary paint booth. So I'm going to be spraying the engine bay with a spray paint, a Rust-Oleum brand, but then I'm going to use a real automotive clear coat out of a gun with a hardener so that we have a good protective layer over the paint, because otherwise in the engine bay it's just going to get scratched super easy all the time. So with the spray paint, the overspray isn't too bad, but when you're using an actual gun, the overspray becomes really bad, so you need to make sure you have a booth if you don't want everything to get covered in overspray. So that being said, I don't want the camera to get covered in overspray, so I'm going to go ahead and paint this. I'm going to lay down the color and then the clear, and when it's all done, I'll reveal it to you guys. Okay guys, so I got the engine bay paint done, and let me tell you, it came out amazing. Way better than I thought it would. The color's awesome, it's super glossy, and overall I'm just super happy with it. But before I show it to you, let me show you the products I used to make it happen. So first and foremost, we've got wax and tar remover. Probably one of the best products you can use for prepping before paint. It's going to remove all wax and tar, obviously, and leave you with a nice clean surface. So then we used a filler primer, just simple Rust-Oleum in a can. Sanded it down. I think I did 2, maybe 3 coats of primer in some spots that were bad on the shock towers. And then for color, we've got this Krylon Color Max Gloss Rich Plum. This is the color that I used for my roll cage, but it's kind of a different series. It's the Color Max instead of what I had before, so it's slightly different, but pretty close. And then the most important part, clear coat. So we've got this Finish One Ultimate Overall Clear Coat. This is a 2-part clear coat with a hardener. That was really important to me while doing the engine bay. I wanted to make sure I had a hardener in the paint. That way it would be somewhat resilient to getting scratched, especially in an engine bay where you're constantly working bending over, using tools in and out of there. I didn't want it to get scratched super easy. So got this paint from my local Napa. That's one of the only auto parts stores you can get actual 2-part clear like this. And I think it was only about 25 to 30 bucks for the quart and maybe another 10 bucks for the hardener. You could also use like a 2K spray can clear that's like a 2-part. You punch in the hardener from the bottom and it mixes. But those are like 30 bucks a can, and it probably would have taken at least 2, maybe 3 cans to do this engine bay. So overall, this finish one was cheaper, and I just sprayed it out of a cheap Harbor Freight spray gun, and it came out really good. So yeah, that's all the products I used. So now let's see the paint. Damn! I cannot get over how good this looks. Every time I walk in the shop and see this, I'm just blown away. It's so exciting to see it. The gloss came out so good, and it's got that nice gloss texture to it. There's a little bit of dirt in it. There's some, you know, spots that the clear didn't coat super well, but like I've said before, at the end of the day, it's a race car. And not only is it a race car, it's a drift car. This thing's gonna see so much abuse, all kinds of track conditions, dirt, rain, oil, whatever. So at the end of the day, I'm not going for perfection. If you try to go for perfection on something like this, it's gonna end up taking you twice as long to go from being really good to being perfect. So it's not really worth the effort, especially to me. If you're a perfectionist, go for it. Have a pro do it. But honestly, I think the biggest thing was if I had done this in a paint booth, an actual paint booth, I probably would have got an almost perfect result. Because really the only downfalls were not having enough space to work around it and then getting dirt and dust in the paint. But if I really cared, I could try to sand it all out, but I don't, because it looks awesome the way it is. So yeah. So that being said, we're going to end this video here, guys. Make sure you hit that like button, and if you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe for more. I'm pretty sure in the next video, we're going to be driving this thing. Really, all that's left to do before we can drive it is coolant, power steering, you know, plug everything back in, get the whole front end put back together, and then modify the drive shaft and install the shifter. So yeah, lots and lots of little things to do, but I've got 2 weeks left before my deadline. I think we'll easily be able to make that, so I'm super excited. So yeah, I hope to see you guys for that, and until then, peace out.